So I'd love to come back sometime.
Sometimes that bothers me because I think it does that. If you're like if I'm married to her, then it shows relatives
around me. So I'm like, oh, I want to go in.
Oh, so that's not very close, is it? It's closer to more than I really did.
How close are we? I think we start very soon.
This is Burbank. So this is. Oh, this is how I'm related here.
I haven't revealed the video yet with the stream, but I'm letting them hear us. So welcome. If you found our stream or you're going to be watching this later, we're going to reveal and undo with the video very soon. But at least the people in person, it's all revealed, right? It's all right here.
Oh, why are we here? He's not the same as the senator. But that's fine.
Yeah, I think we're going to be starting pretty soon. Welcome, everybody. We've officially put and revealed the video for those who are streaming. Some people are streaming live. Some people will be watching it after the fact. In fact, there's someone I'm going to do a shout out to. Her name is Marilyn McPhee. She happens to be the sister of Janet Kramer, where we are. And so she will be watching this later. So hi. You know, in fact, I think it'd be fun if we said, hi, Marilyn, right? Let's do that together. Ready? Hi, Marilyn. I mean, I know I could turn this too. You know what? We could do that, right? Is that okay with everybody? Especially with those little kids. If you don't want me to turn, okay, we'll do it again, okay?
And some of you have seen Marilyn tell stories. Right.
Okay, so yeah, some of you actually know Marilyn. And if you are streaming or watching and you're not Marilyn, just put in your own name and feel the love, okay? So, ready? We'll say, hi, Marilyn. Ready? Hi, Marilyn. I just love it. We can personalize things here, you know, with Story Crossroads. We love this. And hi to everybody. Maybe we should say hi, everybody, just in case. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Hi, everybody. Okay, now we'll turn it around.
Actually, Marilyn was at my house for the Christmas concert 2 years ago.
Oh, see, we're still talking stories about Marilyn McPhee, and she's not even performing tonight. But yes, she was at the Eastman's home when they hosted for a house concert. It was our very first stream ever in January 2023, even though this is our 87th house concert.
Wow.
87, everybody. The nice thing about that is it's proof to the live streamers, like, yeah, you exist. They'll hear the applause. I'm sure they'll applaud on their end. They'll do emojis or whatever they do, maybe a little dance. I don't know. But it's so wonderful to just appreciate stories. And it's also wonderful when we have all these different people willing to open up their homes, like the Kramers today, to have this time together. This is exciting.
Thank you, Kramers.
Yes, thank you, Kramers. Now, if you're here and you know the Kramers and you have no idea what Story Crossroads is, that's okay. You can learn. We are a nonprofit that really specializes in arts education. We want more people to learn the art of storytelling, but in order to learn, it makes sense to have performances so you can see what we're trying to promote. So that's why we have our virtual workshops. We have in May 5th through 8th, 2025, we have our 10th Summit and Festival. Can I get an ooh? Ooh. And of course, for all these things to happen, we get donations from people like you. We get donations and grants from, let's see here, the Zoo Arts and Parks of Salt Lake County. Woo! From the Utah Division of Arts and Museum. Woo! From Utah Humanities. Woo! To Creative West. Woo! Salt Lake City Arts Council. Woo! And just on and on and on. It's just exciting. It really feels good with all the people who have been supporting us. In fact, this is part of our year-end campaign, and our goal is to reach $2,025 by December 30th of this year. We're more than halfway there. So we're like at, let's see, I think we're at 1,000. It's a big number. It's more than 1,000. So we're more than halfway through, and there's still some time left, and we've just been amazed as people doing that. But we want to be amazed by this person. This person is named, well, come here, because the streamers don't see you. Okay, this person is Janine Evans, and she's an amazing storyteller. She has a long librarian experience. In fact, she's a librarian right now. Another ooh. Ooh. Yeah, at the Murray Library, specifically with the young adults, but she's also been a children's librarian. She actually has performed with me sometimes as tandem, which is tons of fun because of our library times or other moments. But she on her own, she's done this for decades. I mean, at least 30 plus years, maybe 40, 30 years? 30. Okay, we'll say 30. We'll say 30 years. So that's pretty darn amazing. And what's really fun is really see how she uses her face and her voice as she tells the story. She's kind of famous for this, which makes it extra fun. So let's put a round of applause. Wait, hold on. Okay, now we're ready. Round of applause to Janine Evans. I know, I need to give the microphone to her.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Hopefully this will all turn out okay because that's kind of a big introduction. So thank you. Merry Christmas, everyone. I know you guys say Merry Christmas to me.
Merry Christmas.
But it makes me feel so much more warm to be able to hear that because we're among friends, don't you think? We're just all friends. So we're just going to pretend that we're just all sitting around together and we've been friends for years and we're just sharing stories. I'll share some stories. And when I'm done sharing stories, it would be fun to hear maybe a couple little stories from you as we're eating some refreshments. Sorry guys, you don't get refreshments with us, but we'll be enjoying them for you. There were so many great stories that happen around through the years over in Europe. And as I searched different stories and stories that I already knew, it was fun to discover some new ones. And this is a story that takes place in Vienna. The pastor and his wife had inherited this old church for him to be the pastor of. It was in disrepair, terrible all over. But they were working, the two of them, to see what they could do to repair it. And getting a little help from the community, but it was mainly the two of them. Just late in December, there was a terrible storm that went through. The wind blew. There was already a leak in the roof of this church that they hadn't repaired yet. Water poured through. The wind shook the building. And some of the plaster fell off of the wall that was right behind the pulpit. It was so close to Christmas. There wasn't going to be time to repair it. The pastor looked at that wall. He was so disappointed. He wanted to have that wall be beautiful to help the people feel the spirit in that building on the night, Christmas Eve, when he gave his Christmas sermon. Well, just a day later, he and his wife went to an auction. And while they were there, they were auctioning off this long piece of cloth It was a tablecloth. It was ivory and gold, and as the auctioneer held it up, the pastor thought, I should get that. That's beautiful. And it was only $6. No one else really bid for it. And so he and his wife took home this beautiful ivory and gold tablecloth. His wife looked at him and said, oh, my dear, why did you even buy it? He says, I don't know. It just felt like the right thing to do. As they walked back into the church and he looked at that missing the missing plaster on the wall, he pulled out that tablecloth. He put it up there, and it was just the size to cover that terrible, terrible hole in that wall. He tacked it up. God is good. He has led me to this tablecloth. Everything will be fine on Christmas Eve. Well, he went to go work on his sermon some more, so he would be ready for that Christmas Eve. And then after an hour or so, he got up to walk around. He went out of the church. He walked up the street, and there was a woman waiting for the bus. And he knew, because the bus came along there fairly regularly, that the bus wasn't coming for a while, and she looked so cold. He says, come into the church, warm yourself. So she followed him in. She sat down in a pew. She bent her head, and she began to pray. After she'd prayed for a few minutes, her eyes looked up and began to scan around the church. And then they went back to that pulpit and to that wall behind the pulpit. And she said, that cloth that is there reminds me of something I had. Just, I had this cloth when I was first married. My husband had caught it for me, and he had it handmade for me. In fact, it has my initials, which are M.P. And her name was Marguerite. And she stood up and she says, they were right near the bottom. And she looked at it. And sure enough, there were her initials right there at the bottom. She goes, that's my cloth. Oh my goodness. I have just chills that it's there. My husband and I, we were married, and during the war, and things were getting very hard for us. They were persecuting the Jews, and my husband and I were against the Nazis. My husband, in his love for me, he sent me over to Switzerland, and he said he would box up all of our household goods and follow me. But he never came. He never came, and I was told that he died in a concentration camp. But here's a memory of our life. The pastor said, I can take it down. You can have that. It's yours. She said, no, it belongs here. It's beautiful. It will brighten the spirits of the people coming. You may keep it. She looked at the clock, her watch. Oh, I must be going now. The bus should be coming soon. And out the door she went. And he said, wait. You should come back and come to our service on Christmas Eve. She said, oh, no, I don't know if I'll do that. I just interviewed for a job as a governess. I didn't get it. I'm going to go home and be by myself, but thank you. And she turned off, and she went off to catch that bus, and she was gone. Christmas Eve came. The church filled up. There were candles lit. There were green boughs that were brought in, and there was the gold and ivory cloth behind the pulpit. The pastor did his very best with his sermon, talked about the baby Jesus and the Jesus growing up, and he brought the congregation, he led them in song. When it was all over, he was shaking the hands of people as they were leaving, and one man stopped and shook his head and said, that cloth that's behind the pulpit, where did you get that? He says, oh, I got it at an auction. He says, it seemed to shimmer with the candlelight. Oh, I thought so too. It added to the ambience, did it not? He goes, yes, it did. You know, my wife and I had a cloth like that. Your wife? Yes, yeah. I have not seen her. We were separated during the war. I sent her over to Switzerland, and when I went to join her, she wasn't there, and I have not seen her, and I presume that she has passed away. It's your wife. And does your wife have the initials of M.P.? She says, yes, she does. In fact, they were on the cloth. I had it made for her. And they went up to that cloth together, leaving the other parishioners aside, and sure enough, he looked at those initials and says, "Yes, this is it, this is the cloth. How did you know that?" And the pastor told him about how he just met her a couple of days ago. He says, "Oh, where is she? I want to see her again." He says, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't know. But I do know, just as she was leaving, she told me that she had interviewed for a position as a governess." "With who?" "I don't know. But she was sad, and she went to her home. That's what I do know." So I must find her. The pastor said, "Well, I'll help you. But let's get through Christmas, and we will go in search for her." And after Christmas, that's exactly what they did. The two of them looked in the paper, and they found an ad for a governess still, and they went to that home, and they were able to obtain her address, which today no one would give out, but back in those days they did. So they got her address, and the two of them were united again, all over a piece of cloth. It was indeed a Christmas miracle. Now, in another part of Europe, up in Russia, on the west side of Russia, there's a legend about a babushka. Anybody heard of babushka before? There's some babushka people. Babushka means grandmother, and the grandmothers usually wear these little cloths over their head. And babushka lived in a little tiny house, big enough for her, because there was only her to live in it. And she was fastidious about keeping that house clean. She would sweep, make sure every night before she went to bed that everything was clean. There was no dust in the corners. There was no little tiny specks from coming in from outdoors, because she was so good at cleaning. Well, one night, she didn't know, but it was the very same night that the Christ child was born. And on that night, just as she had begun sweeping, she hadn't finished, but she had begun sweeping, there was a knock at her door. She thought, who could be coming tonight, on a night like this? And she opened the door, and there before her were some strangers. They were very well dressed, and behind them there were white horses. And there were servants too. And she says, "Oh, my, it's cold out there, and the snow's coming down. Do you want to come in?" And so they came in, "And bring your servants too." And so they all came in and came into their little house. They had to all kind of squish. There wasn't much room. She says, "Oh, and what are you doing out on a night like this?" And one of these men, who had a band around his head and looked rather serious with his long beard, he looked at her and said, "There is a new star tonight, and we are following that star to see a new baby that has been born, a Christ child. He is going to bring peace to the world, and we've got gifts for him." Another one said, "Yes, we've got gold." Another one said, "Yes, and we have frankincense and myrrh." And she says, "Oh my, those sound like exquisite gifts. And how do you know that this child is born?" He said, "We have been told, and we are going there tonight, but we are a little hungry." So she fed them with a little bit that she had. Luckily, she had made bread earlier in the day. She didn't have a lot, but she had some soup she put together for them, and they ate. And they said, "This babe is going to bring us peace. Do you want to come with us?" She says, "Come with you? Well, I can't. I haven't finished cleaning my house." They said, "You don't need to clean your house. Just come with us." She goes, "Oh, no, I could never leave it unclean. But the very best to you." And it was nighttime now. The sky was dark. And they said, "This is the time we want to travel, because we're following the star." And out the door they went. And when they went, the house seemed so empty and kind of cold. And Babushka wrapped herself up, and she thought about how they were going to see a babe that was going to bring peace to the world. Well, maybe I should go. But first, I'm going to clean. And so she swept, and cleaned everything up. And she went to bed that night, thinking about how wonderful it'd be to see this new little baby. I'm going to go find those men. I can do it. They're making stops along the way. So the very next day in the evening, she looked up, and sure enough, there was a new star. She bundled herself up, out into the cold she went, and off she went to the night. she wasn't exactly sure which way they were going, so she knocked on some doors and says, "Have you seen these 3 men? They were very important. They were going to go see a baby." "Yes, they came by, but they've gone on their way." So, "Well, I'm so sorry." And she brought a basket with her that had a few treasures in her, some toys that she'd kept around in her house. And they invited her in for a little something to eat. And she said, "Well, thank you for letting me come. Here's this for your children." And she left a little wooden soldier for them. And off she went into the night. She tried again at a house and another house and another down the path. But no luck. They didn't exactly know where they'd gone. But they'd heard of them. And they pointed her on and said, "I think farther down the road." Well, Babushka, as you know, she never did find the Christ child who would bring peace to the world. But she did meet a lot of people. And legend says that every Christmas that Babushka goes around with her broom and with a basket full of toys, and she knocks on doors and she checks to see if the children are in bed. And if the children are in bed, then she'll leave a little toy at the end of their bed, and then she looks around the room and makes sure it's cleaned up, and she'll sweep out if anything needs to be cleaned up. Wouldn't that be nice to have someone in the night coming up and cleaning up your room? It's a very good thing. And she does this to this very day if you live in that part of the world. And that's the story of Babushka. When my children were young, on Christmas Eve, if they wanted to have anything the next morning, they had to have their rooms all cleaned up, because otherwise Santa would not come and leave them anything. So Christmas Eve was always a very important clean the room up too at our house, because no babushka would come at our house to keep their rooms clean. In some parts of the world, there's Santa Claus, and there's St. Nicholas, and in some parts of the world, there's Father Christmas. And there is this little village way up north, so far north that no one really even goes there. And this city that is there has a great wall all the way around it. And the snows come down, and so because the snows have come down so much, there's snow that is piled up around that wall that you can hardly even see that there's a wall at all. And inside that walled city, there are only children. No grown-ups even live there. There's princes and princesses, and just regular kids. And it's a wonderful place. Would you like to live in a place where there were only children? They could do whatever they wanted. And they loved it there. But they did have to take care of themselves and do work. But about at 7 o'clock at night, they'd have a good afternoon lunch. At 7 o'clock, they'd have a bowl of bread and milk. And then they'd go to bed pretty early. And of course, in that part of the world, there wasn't a lot of sun in the winter. But the very best part of that great walled city is on the far wall, just on the other side, lived Father Christmas. In fact, his house was right up against the wall of their wall. And you could see the rooftop and the chimney of Father Christmas. Oh, the children loved that he was so close. Well, not hardly anybody else in the world even knew that this little city existed. But there was a traveler that came over, and he scaled over this wall through the snow, thinking he's just going over a hill. But when he got to the top, he was totally surprised, because he looked down and said, "There's a village down here with lots of houses, and who knew?" So he went over the wall and into the village. And he walked around, and here he was, a grown-up. And all the houses were much smaller because they didn't need him to be quite as big. And if you walked into a house, you would see the counters of things. The counters in the kitchen were just much smaller, too, for the kids to use. And he looked at all these houses and thought, how strange. Do midgets live here? And then some of the kids came out and they said, hello, you're a stranger among us. Come meet our king. They were so friendly. And the children took him over to the castle to meet the king. And he says, wow, this is quite the place. You'll have to tell me about yourselves. They fed him, and they all gathered around. They liked to sit on the floor a lot, and so he sat down on the floor with them. And they told him about some of the games they liked to play. And he said, well, tell me about some of your traditions. What do you do at Christmas time? And one of the king's counselors said, oh, I'll tell. And he stood up and he says, we have the best traditions here. What we do is on Christmas Eve, we all gather around to the palace and we get on the steps and we sing Christmas carols. And then Father Christmas, he treats us so good because then we go out the back wall and into the forest. And there in the forest is presents hanging on the trees. And we can go gather presents for each other. It is amazing. Father Christmas leaves us the best things for us to choose from to give to each other. Ah, we are so lucky. And the traveler looked at him and said, sounds pretty nice, but why don't you just gather stuff for yourselves instead of for other people? Do you ever get something that you really didn't want? And they kind of looked around at each other, and one of them said, well, I suppose sometimes that happens. So why don't you just get things for yourselves? And the king looked at him and said, that's a fabulous idea. I will decree it for this Christmas. We shall only gather things for ourselves. This will make our celebration even more merry. Thank you for telling us. Well, he stayed with them for a few days and learned more about this little village. And before he went, the king said, now, we've enjoyed having you here, but we like our little village all to ourselves. So if you wouldn't tell other people about it, we'd really appreciate it. He said, okay, it'll be hard, but I'll do that. And over the wall he went and back into his life. And as far as we know, he didn't tell a lot of people about it. But he did tell a couple, and that's how the story got passed down. Well, Christmas Eve came, and all the children, they gathered there at the palace steps, and the king had his royal music director come along and lead them in Christmas carols. They sang Deck the Halls. They sang Oh Christmas Tree. It was so much fun. But some of the kids, they looked around and they thought, okay, this is going to be fun. But they weren't quite as excited as they had been the year before. And soon the Christmas caroling was done, and the king said, it is time. Now, remember, I've sent it all out to you, but remember this year, you are only gathering presents for yourself. Isn't that exciting? And everybody went, yeah. He says, now, go off with you. And so off into the forest they went. The children were so excited, they ran out the door and into the forest, and they looked into the trees. And they looked and looked, but they couldn't find anything hanging in the trees. So, have you seen anything? No, I haven't seen anything either. Let's go further. And they went further. Now, there was one boy, his name was Ing. Ing had a little sister, and Ing's little sister, she was crippled. Her legs didn't work. And so she couldn't go out into the forest. And she sat by the window watching things. And Ing felt so bad for her. He thought, she can't even go out and get anything for herself. The king has declared we're only supposed to get things for ourselves. But what about my sister Mary? What am I going to do? And he had a pillowcase, like everybody else, to carry things back home. Now, no one will know if I disobey the king and I get things for my sister. I'm just not going to tell anybody. So off into the forest Ing went. And he went off in a direction away from everybody else because he didn't want people to see that he was pulling off the tree girl things. And off he went. And soon he was seeing some lovely things. He saw a tea set. He picked that off the tree and put it in his bag. And he saw a paint set too. She loved to paint. He put that in the bag too. And he saw some new books too. He put the books in there too. And the bag was feeling heavy already. Thought, I better not take too much so I leave things for others. And off he came back and he saw some of his friends. He says, wasn't Father Christmas so good to us this year? They held up his pillowcase. I haven't seen anything. Oh, I saw lots of things just back over that way. And soon a whole lot of kids went that way, looking to see what Father Christmas had left them over there. But they soon came out, and some of the younger kids, they had started crying. They were so upset that there was nothing there for them. Ing, he brought his things and he took him into his house, ready to give him to his sister in the morning. And the other children, they looked and with nothing left for them, and finally they gave up and went back to their houses. And some of them stopped at the castle and told the king, there was nothing this year. I think either Father Christmas is sick and no one's going to get anything for Christmas, or I don't know what's going on, but I hope Father Christmas is okay. They all went to their houses. And the king went into the palace and he pondered that. He paced back and forth and back and forth. Now, what has happened? What has happened? It is late, but we're going to have to get to the bottom of this. The very next day was Christmas Day, and Ing pulled out his presents and gave it to his sister. And one of his friends came by, and he said, so how does your sister have all these things? Well, they were there in the forest. Did your sister go out? And he looked kind of sheepish and said, well, she's got some nice things. He said, okay. And he went and told the king. And he didn't mean to be a snitch, but he thought it was so interesting. And the king said, so Ing, who was giving something to his sister, got something very interesting. We have got to have a party. Go up over the wall and talk to Father Christmas. He should be back by now. Yeah, he'll be home after his trip around the world. He may be asleep, but this is important. And so 3 of his counselors went up over the wall. They put a ladder up against the wall. They climbed up to the top, and there they were on the roof of Father Christmas's house. They went down the chimney, and the chimney was right in Father Christmas's bedroom. Lucky for them. And out the door, out the chimney they came, and there he was, sleeping away. They crept up to him and said, Father Christmas, Father Christmas. What? Oh, you're those kids from over the wall. Yes, we are, Father Christmas.
Yeah, how was your Christmas?
Well, actually, it wasn't so good.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, you have to let me rest here. I'm tired. Oh.
But Father Christmas.
Oh, what?
Why wasn't there anything for us in the trees?
Nothing for you for the trees. And the trees for you. Well, was there something for someone out there?
Well, we have heard that there was some for Mary.
And how did Mary get them?
We've heard Ing gathered them.
That's right, Ing gathered them. Now you think about that, and let me go to sleep. Goodbye!
And he was soon snoring away again. They went out the door this time. They crawled up to the side of the house, over the roof, and they reported back to the king. The king said, so, Father Christmas realizes that Ing was able to get presents for Mary. That is only one thing. That means we were not doing the right thing at all. Well, next year will be different, won't it? And he asked his writer, the history keeper of the Great Walled City, to write down what had happened and how they had chosen to be able to only get presents for themselves. And it should be read every year. So that next Christmas, before they even sang any carols, the great book was brought out. And the story was told of the traveler coming into their city and what happened. And what happened with Ing. And then the king said, now, from here on out, let us remember that we are to give to each other. And there was great cheers that rose up. Can you give me great cheers? Yay! And they sang their carols. And out the door, the wall, they went. And sure enough, Father Christmas was very good to them that year. Now in Italy, if we go to Italy, there's Befana, and she's a lot like Babushka. She likes to make sure things are clean too. But in the legend of Befana, she actually flies through the air. And she has a basket of little trinkets, but she gives her trinkets out on January 6th, which is Epiphany. And very close to babushka, but there's a wonderful legend. As I was looking at different stories, I found a interesting Christmas story that was in a book of Italian Christmas tales. And when I read it and started, I thought, oh, this sounds like a lovely tale. And by the time I got to the end, I thought, oh, this is a story maybe I shouldn't tell. So I'm not going to tell this to you. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the story because it was so interesting. But it doesn't seem like a good Christmas story. But do you want to hear it? Yeah, I know. So there was a little girl, her name was Teresa, and she was a poor waif, just a little tiny, thin little thing. And Pasqualina, she took care of her. She was not her mother, but poor Teresa, she'd been left on the streets, and Pasqualina said, oh, I'll take her. I need some hands to help me around here anyway. Now, Teresa, she was about 6 years old. She says, you are to take care of the pig, which was named Coquetta. And so every day, little Teresa would take Coquetta out, and she would make sure she had things to eat. And one day, it was cold, it was February, she took this little piglet out, and she got distracted. She was looking at some things, and suddenly she looked around, and the pig was gone. Thought, oh no, and I'm so cold, I'm so hungry. She called to her, Coquetta, Coquetta, but she didn't come. So she went back home, and Pasqualina looked at her and said, oh, you terrible, terrible child. And she whipped her, and she kicked her, and she hit her. See, isn't this a terrible Christmas story? Yeah, poor Teresa. She felt terrible, and she says, you won't get any food unless you go out and get that pig. So off she went. She didn't even have shoes, to make the story even worse. She didn't even have any shoes. So off she went to try and find that pig. She called and called and called and called, and she went further and further away. And finally, in a field, she hears, oh, there she is. So she found that little pig, and she picked him up and held him, and the pig helped her stay a little bit warm, and she brought her back. She says, I found her, Pasqualina, I found her. And she took her to the house, and Pasqualina says, oh, good, at last. Now say your prayers. She was so hungry. Her little tummy was just hurting because she was so hungry. Just no food until you say your prayers. So she said her prayers. And finally she was given a little bowl of soup and a little crust of bread. And she ate it hungrily. It was never enough to fill her up, but it was enough to satisfy her a little. Well, days went on like this, and Pasqualina decided that the pig got loose again. And after the second time, she says, we're tying you up to the pig. So she took a rope and put it around Teresa, and then she took a rope and the other end, and she tied it around the pig. And after that, the pig and the girl stayed together. And off they'd go every day. Well, the pig, as pigs do, it grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until the pig was like 300 pounds. So no longer was she being tied to the pig, because if she did it, the pig went off, she could just go to the ground. But the pig liked her so much that she could just take a stick and just kind of tap it on its back, and the pig would come back. Well, sometimes she didn't come back soon enough, and she was beat up, and just terrible things happened to the little Teresa. Well, finally, it's Christmas time, and she brought the pig back home, this great big fat pig. It's Christmas Eve, and she comes into Pasqualina's house, and there's all these people, and they're bringing pots, and they're bringing scales, and there's lots of talk, and everybody's so excited. And do you know what they did? They took the pig, and they slaughtered the pig. Yeah, poor pig was gone. And they took some of the blood and fried it up, because that's what they did in this little Italian Christmas story. And then Pasqualina took the dried blood, and there was little Teresa just sitting in the corner watching all this, mortified. Oh, this is terrible. And they said, here, have some of this. And little Teresa looked at it and said, no. Because even though she was dying of hunger, she couldn't eat Coquetta the pig. And that was the end of the story. So isn't that a terrible story? And that's why I couldn't really tell you the story, because it was such a terrible story. Merry Christmas on that one. Kind of memorable though, huh? In Denmark, they have Nisse. Does anybody know what the Nisse are? They're little men about 2 or 3 feet tall, and they have long white beards. They usually have red hats, kind of like you see gnomes. But gnomes, you can only see, you never see their eyes, you just see their nose. But Nisse, you can see their eyes. And they are very good workers for farmers. And they like to live in the barn. But Nisse, they can also play tricks. If you're in Denmark, it's Nisse. If you're over in Sweden, they are called Tomte. But the Nissen, they are tricky little fellows. And you have to keep them happy. And how you keep them happy is you make sure they have porridge every night. Not too hard, but the porridge has to have a good pat of butter on top. And not just how you would feed the rest of your family. No, they like 2 or 3 regular pats of butter on their porridge. Well, one day on a farm, the Nissen had been happy, and the farmer came back with his horse, and he knew if he just left the horse outside the barn, the Nissen would come out and take the horse in, unsaddle it, brush it down, and put it in the stall. He didn't really ever see the Nissen, but he knew that would happen. And sure enough, he'd look back later, and the horse was taken care of. It would be quite handy to have a Nissen around. I thought, I would like one of these. Well, his daughter, it was her job to take the porridge out to him every night into the barn, and she thought, I'm going to play a trick on him. And she took butter, and she put it in the bowl first, and there was like 3 pats of butter. She didn't skimp. And then she took the porridge and put it on top. And she took it out to the barn, and she left it on the floor and said, "Here's your porridge. Good night." It was Christmas Eve, and off into the house she went. And when she was gone, the Nissen crept out, and he looked at that porridge and said, "Where's the butter? Where's the butter? Where's the butter? I don't like this at all. Now you don't make a Nissen angry. No siree, especially not on Christmas Eve. He wanted to have some good porridge, and the butter made all the difference. So he looked around the barn. The horse, he liked the horse, but he saw the cow. And he took the cow out, and he let the cow go, and he pushed it away. He said, "Okay, you're going to be one less cow around here." And then he said, "Well, I'm hungry. I'll eat the porridge anyway." So he dug in. Oh, there is butter. And the last bite was so buttery and delicious. So good. Oh, I got rid of the cow, and they gave me butter. Oh, what am I going to do? And he went out and he started to look for the cow, but he couldn't find the cow. He couldn't find the cow anywhere. So he went over to a neighbor's house and he looked at all the cows. It was dark, it was hard to tell, but he knew exactly what the cow looked like. And he started looking at all their cows, and they were all in a pen. And he found a cow that looked a lot like the farmer's cow that he lived with. So he found that cow and he brought the cow back, put it back in the barn. And in the morning the farmer came out, looked around, everything was good. He fed the cow, he fed the horse, and he went back into the house, never knowing the difference. And, well, the other farmer, well, he never knew what happened to his cow. But if you ever have a Nissen around, remember to always make sure that there's lots of butter on top of the porridge. Okay? Now, most of you probably know that Christmas trees come from Germany. That's where the tradition comes from, to have a Christmas tree. When they first had Christmas trees, they would just put them on tables, so they weren't that high. Does anybody have a Christmas tree on a table? You do, over here. So some of you do. You've gone back to the old ways. Very nice. Gone back to the old ways. But then when they came over to the United States, they started getting bigger because we have Texas, and Texas has told us that you can have everything bigger and better in the United States, so that's what we decided to do, have them even bigger. Teddy Roosevelt was president. And when Teddy Roosevelt was president, he was a conservationist. And he decided, there's too many trees getting cut down for Christmas. This isn't good. We need to have these trees growing to make our land beautiful. So he declared that the White House would not have a Christmas tree that year. We had 2 sons. He had Archie and Quentin. And Archie, he thought that was terrible that his father would not let them have a Christmas tree in the White House. So he went outside when his father wasn't around, and he found a Christmas tree right there on the White House lawn. And he cut it down, and between he and his brother Quentin, they were able to sneak it in the house, and they got a little table because it wasn't a full-size tree, and they put it in a good-sized closet, and they put the tree up. And then they found the carpenter that worked there at the White House, and they asked him if they could help put some lights around it. Because by 1902, they actually had Christmas lights for the trees. And they were able to put some lights around that tree, and they kept it a secret from their dad. Well, Christmas Christmas morning came, and at the White House at that time, there was a nice big fireplace where Teddy Roosevelt and his wife slept, and that's where all the Christmas stockings were hung. And so Christmas morning, the children came and knocked on the door. They were not up yet. And they said, come in, come in. And the children came in, and they saw the stockings. And they said, oh, get your stockings, dears. And they got their stockings down. They said, come on, let's get on the bed, everyone. And they opened the stockings on the bed. And then Archie said, well, I have a surprise for you, too. I said, you do? What's your surprise? Because we have to follow me. And so together they went out of the room. They went over to this big closet. He says, now close your eyes. So his mom and dad both closed their eyes. He opened the door. He says, now open your eyes. And the tree was lit. He says, we have a Christmas tree. And his father looked at that and said, oh my goodness, look at that. And sure enough, they had a Christmas tree. And Archie and Quentin had to put little presents for each of them on the Christmas tree. And how could his parents be mad about that? So they took the presents off and gave them to each other. And that was the year the White House didn't have a Christmas tree, but really did have a Christmas tree. And these Christmas trees, they first came from Germany, and then they went over to England. And Queen Victoria, she was married to Prince Albert, who was from Germany. And Prince Albert brought the tradition of Christmas trees over. And he made sure there was lots of Christmas trees around. But the Christmas trees that sat on tables. They didn't do the full-size Christmas trees. Pretty fun. Now, this story takes place, this next story, takes place over in Germany. But it's not originated from Germany. Lieutenant Claire Klein, he was in a B-24 bomber. It was 1944, and World War II was raging. Off he flew. They were flying over Holland, and they were under attack. Lieutenant Claire Klein was the pilot. He looked back, and the tail of the plane was on fire. He told the crew, we have to jump, we have to jump. They had their parachutes on, and it was only moments later that they were all out of the airplane and going down. They landed safely, and all made it alive. And there were villagers that saw them coming down, and the plane coming down in flames. And they ran out because they could tell it was Americans. They were hoping that these Americans had gum and candy. They loved that from the Americans. And they had a little bit of gum on them, and they surrounded them. And they were excited to see them. But shortly after, because Holland had been now under the control of Nazi Germany, there was a German soldier that also came out. And he put a gun to them and escorted them into town. 2 weeks they were kept prisoner there. They were fed and they were okay, but then they were moved to a camp. It was a concentration camp for officers in the war. And this camp was called Stalag Luft II. And in that camp, there were bunks. There were barracks, I should say. There were barracks, and inside there were bunks. Things were pretty primitive. They had a little bit of bedding. It was just a straw mattress, no pillow whatsoever, and they were each given just a very thin blanket. It was February. It was cold. They had jackets they'd been wearing, but not a lot of layers on, and the nights were tough. Well, in the day, they would go around the camp, and they were given food to eat, usually a lot of barley. And the barley, it was okay, but it gave them a little extra protein when they'd find the weevils in it. So they thought, well, I guess we can eat these too. And then they were given something to drink, some kind of coffee type of stuff, but it wasn't very good. And they were also given a little bit of bread. The bread was fortified with sawdust. And then sometimes, on some good days, they were given some soup or some stew. And that sometimes had some shrapnel in it to make it extra exciting. They'd try and get that out before they ate it. Life in that camp was pretty slow and mundane. As you've heard from other stories from that time period, many prisoners of war were put to work. But the Geneva Convention prevented that. Officers had to work. And so they didn't have anything to do. And sometimes boredom can be pretty tough. They were given some fabric and some needles, though. And so Lieutenant Claire Klein decided he would try and make something. And he found that he could put together hats. He He made quite a few hats. In fact, his wife, who he loved dearly, named Anne, that was back home, she still had a postcard that said, "I've made more hats. I'm sick of making hats. Love, Claire." There wasn't much to it because he couldn't write a lot because all those cards were censored, but that one made it through. And he made hats until finally he thought, "I'm sick of making hats." Now these guards that were there that watched them, they watched them closely, but they were never too mean to them. And Red Cross would send care packages to them. They got a little bit of food, and they also got cigarettes in their care packages because at that time they didn't realize cigarettes were really bad for you, and so they sent cigarettes to the soldiers to help keep their morale up. And Claire, he didn't smoke, so he'd put his cigarettes to the side, and they became money for him. He didn't really have money, but they were like money that he could barter for them. He went up to one of the guards and he says, "I'm just wondering if you would like a penknife," which is just a small knife, "and I could give you 3 packs of cigarettes for a penknife." And the guard looked at him and said, "Bravo." And he found one, brought it back, and they made the exchange. And now Claire had a penknife. He loved to whittle. He found some pieces of wood, and he began carving things. In fact, he was very good at carving airplanes. His favorite airplane to carve was a B-24 bomber, the same kind that he was in when he was shot down. He made quite a few of these little B-24 bombers. The days were longer. He'd sewed, he'd whittled, he'd sewed, he'd whittled, and he was sick of this. And one day he looked up to the sky and says, "Oh, dear God, let me do something useful here." And just a few minutes later, one of the people that he was in prison with came by, and he was whistling. He was whistling. That's Turkey in the Straw. I remember that song, Turkey in the Straw. You know that one, Dan, don't you? That's a great song. Oh, that brought memories back to Claire. Oh, you know, he was from Minnesota. And in Minnesota, this little small town that he came from, Saturday night they'd have dances. And there was some old-time fiddlers that would play those songs. They'd play Turkey in the Straw and Red River Valley. Oh, those were good times. He loved those times. And then he remembered how those old-time fiddlers had violins. Now, he loved those violins. In fact, when he was a boy, he'd gone to go see his uncle. And he was in one of the back bedrooms where there was some things stacked up. And he saw in that back bedroom a box. And he opened the box, and there was a violin inside of it. And just as he was looking at that violin, his uncle came in and said, "Huh, that old violin, I've never played it. Do you want it?" Claire said, "Yeah, I'll take it." So he took the violin and he took it home. It didn't have strings on it. The bridge was broken. Some of the little knobs at the top were broken. And he looked at that violin and says, "I can fix it." He was from a farm. He learned how to fix lots of things. And so he worked at it. Little by little, he whittled out a new bridge. He stuck that on there and glued it. And then he fixed the little turn parts at the top. And he bought some new strings. That was hard-earned money to be able to get new strings. And now he was ready to play that violin. But he didn't know how. There was no violin teachers around, but there were the fiddlers that would fiddle at the dances. So he took his violin to them, and they showed him how to do it, how to change the notes with his fingers on the strings. And he practiced. He went back to them, and he practiced some more, and he got better and better at it. Well, they asked about how he got that violin, and he told them how he did and how he fixed it. He says, "You fixed that violin?" "Yeah, I did." And he thought it was pretty interesting. So he went and got a book about how to repair violins. And there were some of the old-time fiddlers that had some problems with their violins and said, "Hey, you know, this is what's happening with mine. Can you fix that?" He goes, "I'll give it a try." He was just a teenager, but he could fix violins. He managed to learn how to do that. And Claire soon was playing Saturday night at the dances along with those friends of his that had nurtured and taught him how to play the violin. Oh, those were good memories that Claire had as he walked past that man that was whistling. Just that little bit of whistling that brought back all those memories. Wow. He thought, you know what I should do? I should make a violin while I'm here. Yeah, that's what I should do. I'll make a violin. Yeah. And he went into the bunkhouse, And he looked at their bunks. They were just slats of wood where the straw mattresses were on top that were only about this thick. And he lifted up the straw mattress, and there was pretty good looking slats there. And he pried one of them out and looked at the grain of it and said, that looks pretty good. And one of his bunkmates came by and said, what are you doing, Claire? I'm going to make a violin. I looked at him and laughed. Oh yeah, good for you. I'm going to make a trombone tomorrow. And off he went on his way. And Claire wasn't discouraged. He took that slat of wood and he took it outside and thought, yeah, that's going to work good. And another person came by and said, what are you doing, Klein? I'm going to make a violin. Yeah, going to make a violin with that, huh? Good for you. Of course, no one believed him. He said, I am, but I need another slat of wood, and I've taken one from my bunk. Would you be willing to give me one of yours? You can make a violin. I'll give you one of mine. So he took another slat out of another bunk. And this went on, and he got several slats together, and he looked at how the wood grain looked, and then he took his penknife, and he began to do a bit of carving. I need more tools. And he walked around the camp, and he found a piece of broken glass. He took that glass against a rock, and he chiseled it till it had a nice sharp point. And he had himself a little chisel. Well, now getting up was rather exciting, because every day he could work on his violin. And as it started to take shape, the bottom of it turning out looking like a violin, people started believing him. But then it came to the neck, and Lieutenant Klein, he looked at that, thought, what am I even doing? I've got the bottom, I've got to do the neck, I've got to get a top, I don't have any glue. What am I thinking I'm doing? This is even ridiculous that I even thought of this. And then suddenly, two things happened almost simultaneously. He heard the thought so clearly in his head that said, you can do it. I can do it. And then a remembrance came to him. Being on the farm with his father. And now his father, it seems like he could fix anything. And he remembers being out with the tractor with his father. And his father turned to him and said, Claire, being on a farm, you've got to learn to fix things. And you can fix about anything. Even if you think it can't be fixed, it can be fixed. You just keep working at it. Anything can be done with about anything. Anything can be done with about anything. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to keep trying. So the bottom needed to be bent a little bit to make it in that shape that a violin is. And so he soaked it in some water, and he was able to bend that wood to just the right shape. Now, he didn't have another violin to look at. He had never made a violin before. He had this all in his memory about how long a violin should be and with the shape of it, but it looked pretty good. And then he slowly worked on the top of the violin. And sure enough, he had pieces for the neck, but he just had the pieces. How was he going to fit it together? How was he going to glue it together? Got stuck. Days went on. Thinking about it, he'd wander around camp. They'd look at him, say, Claire, what's going on? Why aren't you working on your violin? Because I'm working on it. I just need to think about it for a while. Keep thinking. They cheered him on that way. And then one day he was sitting in a chair, and his hand was on the top of the chair, and his fingers were curved around the seat of the chair, and they went right to one of the legs of the chair, and he felt something right there at the leg and the seat, right around there. He thought, there's some resin there. He got down immediately, he looked under the chair, and sure enough, there was a little bit of extra resin right around the edge of the leg of the chair that connected it to the seat of the chair. That's it. There's glue right there. He took out his penknife and he scraped that resin off. One of his friends said, what are you doing now, Claire? I've got resin right here. And he was able to catch it and contain it. And he says, this is the glue. This is the glue I've been wanting. And sure enough, some friends came along and helped him to scrape off glue. They piled it together. They melted it down. And he had glue for his violin. He was able to glue those pieces together. Now his violin was really taking shape. It was looking like a violin. He was thrilled. But then he realized, how would he get strings? Well, there was one of the guards that had been watching him. And he went up to one of the guards and said, I don't know if you understand me, but I've been working. He brought his violin over to him and said, I've been working on this, and I need strings for it. They go along this way. The guard looked at him and said, mm-hmm, yeah. And he says, and the guard said, 6. And he knew what that meant. He knew that he wanted 6 packs of cigarettes. Now, Claire had been trying to save his cigarettes, but he didn't have that many. But some of his friends were willing to donate packs of cigarettes. And he had 4. He just needed 2 more. He took them to the guard, and the guard got him some cat gut. Now, cat gut sounds like it came from the guts of cat. But just so you know, it doesn't. It does come from guts, but they usually get it from goats or sheep. And they take the inside of the intestine, and they stretch it, and they twist it, and they stretch it, and they twist it, and they turn it into strings. And still to this day, there are some stringed instruments that have catgut on them, but not very many. Isn't that correct? Yes, indeed. Here's a string player back over here. And so he had catgut for his violin. Who knew you needed catgut for violins, huh? So he took the strings and he put them on the violin. The violin had beautiful F-holes. It had a beautiful shape. He also thought, it would look much better if it was varnished. And so he took the violin to the guard. He showed the guard again the violin. And he says, oh, shiny, shiny. And the guard looked at him. It says shiny. He was trying to think what he could do to show him. And then he saw the polish on the guard's boot. And he looked at that polish. He showed him his boot. He showed him his own boot, who wasn't polished. Shiny, shiny. And the guard knew what he was talking about. And so more cigarettes were given to him. And he came back with some varnish. And the strings were removed. And varnish was put on top of that violin. And it looked beautiful. Now he had a violin with strings. It was wonderful. But he was missing something else. Do you guys know what he was missing?
A bow.
Exactly. He was missing the bow. And he didn't think he could make a bow because there was no horsehair around to make the bow. So once again, he went to that guard. He showed him the violin. He took his hand. He went like this. This. And the guard said, 8. And he showed him 8. And so, with the help from his friends and the Red Cross packages that had come, he was able to gather 8 packs of cigarettes, which was a lot, but they were able to do it. The year was just about out by this time. He had started this at the end of August and been working on this for the last few months. And the guard brought him a bow. And he was so excited to try this violin. Would it just sound like it was croaking, like it was a croaking frog, or would it really play? He took it into his barrack, put it up to his shoulder. He took the bow, tightened the strings on the bow, and he pulled it across that violin. It was working, and he practiced a little bit, and they said, Claire, go outside. Because it was a little bit rusty. So he went outside, and he practiced, and soon he was playing Turkey in the Straw and Red River Valley, all those fun favorites that he remembered. And some of the people came around and clapped their hands to it. Said, you can really do this, Klein, can't you? He says, yeah, I can. I can really still play the violin. It made him so happy. Well, Christmas was getting closer and closer. And as the Red Cross packages would come in, the men would take out some of the things that were extra special to them, and they'd put them in a pile because they wanted to have a Christmas Eve special dinner, more so than the weevil barley. And so they'd save some of their things, and Christmas Eve came, and they took all their little supplies, they divided it among themselves. It didn't matter who had what. It was all put into one pile, and they shared with each other. And they started reminiscing about back home. And as they reminisced, they grew a little bit melancholy, thinking about how far away they were from their loved ones. And Claire, he picked up that violin, and he pulled the bow across the strings, and he began to play Silent Night. And after playing it through once, the men, they began to sing those beautiful words. And the door of the barrack was open, and they could hear someone else singing back there in another language. And one of the men went out to see the guard out there with tears coming down his eyes. He was singing too. Would you join with me in singing Silent Night?
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round young Virgin, Mother and Child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace.
It was a beautiful Christmas Eve. Well, that May, they were let free, and those soldiers were so excited to be home. Claire Klein, he went home to Tacoma, Washington. He built himself a house for he and his wife Anne, and they had 3 kids of their own. The violin, Claire Klein, he made a cabinet for it, and it sat in their living room all those years. The children were told stories about the violin and how it came to be. Grandchildren were told about the story of the violin. And for years it sat there. And then in 1995, there was a new museum on the Intrepid, just off of New York City. They used an old air carrier, and they created an air and space museum. And they requested that Claire Klein donate his violin to live in that museum. To open the museum, they invited the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, and the concertmaster would be playing Claire's violin. Now, at this point in Claire's life, he didn't feel much like traveling clear to New York for it, so he stayed home, but he did willingly send his violin there to be remembered by others. And the concertmaster, he took that violin and thought, I don't know if this thing will play, knowing the history of it, but I'll give it a try. And he pulled the bow across that violin. He was so surprised. And after the concert was done, he took time to go back and he called Claire Klein. Is it Lieutenant Klein? Well, yes, not lieutenant anymore, but this is Claire Klein. This is the concertmaster. I played that violin of yours. Oh, you did? Yes, I did. And it was quite amazing. That was truly an art that you made. I could hardly believe that you made it in a camp like that. That you were just incredible. Oh no, I wasn't incredible. I didn't really do it. It was a gift from God. Well, whatever it was, thank you for the opportunity to play your violin. The violin sits there to this day, Lieutenant Claire Klein's violin. And when he got off the phone, he thought, if only everyone can remember their gifts from God. The violin. Merry Christmas to you all. May you have a wonderful Christmas holiday. Thank you for taking the time to listen and to partake in stories, and may your memories of Christmas be always dear to your heart.
Thank you so much. That was just amazing. And we are just thinking about our own Christmases, our own gifts and experiences that we've had. Let's put another round of applause to Janine Evans. And here's something that's kind of funny. So, for those who are streaming, I opened up the stream for January 10th and not today. So I sent a message to those who had marked to live stream today. But funny enough, people were still able to find it and enjoy it this time. So thank you so much for those who found the stream, and it's a little bit tricky. Sometimes you have to work extra hard, and maybe with the gift of God, you can find the stream and you can enjoy these stories as well. So we appreciate those who found us after all, anyway, because of that. Starting the wrong one. But that's okay. We are grateful to the Kramers. We have some light refreshments that are in the back, or actually they do. And those who are watching or watching it later, make sure you go into your fridge or your pantry and get yourself a treat. And also, to show appreciation to Janine, We also invite you, if you'd like, to go to storycrossroads.org/donate, and that way you can donate, especially those who are online. You can see the QR code as well. That will help you. So thank you so much, everybody. You've been wonderful. And feel free to get up, but just so you know, the next house concert is January 10th. It's going to be at my place in West Jordan. It will be Paul Baruch and Dark Fiddles. So we have a couple story musicians on January 10th. That will be Friday in 2025.
Thank you so much. That was so fun. Those are great stories.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being a witness. You did great.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That's my island. Oh, I was saying I wanted to see it.
With this wine live. You're welcome. And because there was some versions of the story that was no, that did bring in the gospel. His book, there was some poetry. And that's what in his own words.
Thanks for your research and all of your work.
Felt like he was giving us to That's cool.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.
This is awesome. There's a lot of research.
I didn't know that story a long time ago, but because you know,
But I registered that he would never ask me for it, so.
I can't imagine how